This Parsha Podcast is dedicated in loving memory and leilui nishmas, Mrs. Ruth Salomon, Yenta Bas Moshe, who passed away yesterday. May her soul be elevated in heaven. I had a dream, but it wasn't like that dream that you know from the I had a dream speech. It was more like a nightmare. This was my dream last night. I was scheduled to speak at some big event, some sort of speaking arrangement, and I wasn't prepared. I had nothing to say, and I kept on telling myself, this is my dream, by the way. I'll get around to preparing. I'll eventually prepare. And the last memory that I have before I woke up in a cold sweat is some of the listeners, some of the people, they're heaping Chinese food onto their plate because I guess there was some food to accompany the speech, and they're settling in for the talk, and I have to talk, and I have nothing to say, and it was going to be such an embarrassment, and I woke up. But the truth is, even though this was a nightmare, it's not far from reality. We know the Talmud tells us that's the things that you worry about during the day may appear in your dream at night. Because it really was not so far from reality for me having to speak. It's Wednesday, it's Parsha Podcast day, and having nothing to say. Now, the truth is I have a really good excuse. I'll tell you more about that. But as of today, I was really worried that I had nothing to say in the Parsha. And the excuse is that my wife, she's in Israel. And she flew to Israel on Sunday with the baby. And my daughter Miriam, she was there already. Because you see, my in-laws, they like to take their grandchildren to Israel for the bar and bas mitzvah. So for 2 weeks, Miriam's in Israel with her grandparents. And for the last week of her trip, my wife's going to join her. So I'm running the show here myself. I'm managing the home front myself. And then Monday, we drove to Canada. We fit everything in the car, miraculously. And I'm here at the cottage, an hour north of Toronto. I got to manage things myself. We have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and all sorts of snacks, bedtime, supervising the kids. We're here on the lakefront, so there's water everywhere, and you have to be extremely vigilant. And I've become highly domesticated, doing all the meals and trying to clean a little bit and keep the peace. And I told my wife, I said, listen, I'm not giving them baths every day. It's just, that's not going to happen. We'll give them a nice shower before Shabbos. We had a video call from Israel, and my wife asked me about my 2-year-old, Yisrael Meir. Could you please brush his hair? I said, no, I'm not going to do this. I have not done laundry since I was single, and I'm not going to learn how to do it again. I'm not going to Google how to do laundry again. So I took the kids to the mall today to get them some clothes to tie them over. But this is all a long way of saying this week is a really challenging one to think of what we're going to say in the podcast. But as always, the Almighty sent me something to say. It's a gift from Hashem, as it is every week. But this week, I really appreciate that it's not any of my own abilities or talents. It's all a gift from the Almighty on high. And that's because he believes in y'all. And he knows how important it is for y'all to come and to study together on the Parsha Podcast. I'm not in the Torch Center. I'm in Innisfil, Ontario. Of course, I want to extend my best wishes to all of our friends in Houston. It was hit by a Hurricane Beryl, which is kind of funny, I have to say, as an aside, because I had a roommate when I was in yeshiva in Israel. His name was Beryl, and he was kind of like an unwieldy hurricane. So when I first heard that there's a hurricane heading for Mexico named Beryl, I thought it was hysterical, but then it made a sharp right turn, and it really struck Texas hard. I've been told that the Torch Center is safe, and it was not flooded, unlike the previous hurricane. In our neighborhood, there were some felled trees, and some people lost power, but our home did not lose any power, and I hope that all of our Houston friends are okay. And I hope that everyone has a safe and successful and productive summer. So this week is Parshas Chukas. And again, it's another parsha with a fascinating panoply of all these very interesting subjects. It begins, of course, with the red heifer, this very unusual, strange process for how to render someone who had become impure due to contact or proximity with a dead body. They become impure. They cannot eat sacrifices. They cannot prepare sacrifices if they were Kohen. They cannot enter the temple grounds. Well, how do you remedy that? How do you rectify that? How do you restore purity? You got to take a red heifer, completely red. You got to slaughter it. You got to burn it. You got to make a huge pile of ashes and mix that with some other ingredients and sprinkle it upon the people who are impure. And there's a whole process for how to do this as detailed in our Parsha. And once they finish the process, they become pure. That's how our Parsha begins. And that is the eponymous subject of the Parsha, because this is a classic chok, the word of our Parsha, Chukas. It's the chok. It's the law, the statute of the Torah, namely this law that is completely beyond human intellect, this law of the red heifer. That's how our Parsha begins. And then we read about the death of Miriam, Moshe's older sister. And as a result of that, we have the cessation of the well of Miriam. The Jewish people have been drinking for the last 40 years, water from a rock. Well, in the rock, there was a well. And that well, we discover now, post facto, that well that had given water to the rock was all in the merit of Miriam. She passes and the well goes away. And everyone's thirsty, as you may imagine. And they complain to Moshe, and God tells Moshe, go take your staff and go speak with that stone that had previously harbored the well of Miriam, speak to it so that it emits water. And Moshe, he's told to take the staff, and the previous time he had been told directly, take the staff and strike the rock. This is in the middle of the book of Exodus, as you perhaps recall. And instead of speaking to the rock, he hits the rock, and it does indeed emit water. So the well has been restored. But Moshe and Aaron, who was with them, they are condemned to die before the entrance into the land. And then we read about their interactions with some of the various nations and empires on the east bank of the Jordan. They have not quite crossed over the Jordan, of course, and they're trying to get passage towards the land of Israel, towards the Holy Land. They're heading west. So they go to Edom. Will you give us passage? They won't. Then we have the death of Aaron. Aaron is succeeded by his son Elazar. We have the attack of Amalek, the Israelite counteroffensive. We have the very fascinating episode of the attacking serpents, and Moshe makes a staff upon which it has a metal serpent, and if you're bitten by a serpent, you look up and you are healed. And then we have this very interesting song of the well that recounts the miracles of the East Bank Wars, with the war against Sichon, the king of the Amorites, the war against Og, the king of Bashan, and the nation finally settles on the plains of Moab opposite Jericho. In this podcast, I want to focus on two segments, specifically what happened in the aftermath of the death of two giants in our Parsha. Moshe's elder siblings, first the death of Miriam at the beginning of chapter 20 of the book of Numbers, and then the death of Aaron at the end of chapter 20 in the book of Exodus. Chapter 20 begins. The nation arrives in Midbar Tzin, in the wilderness of Zin, in the first month, and they settle in Kadesh. Vatamas sham Miriam, and Miriam died over there, and she was buried over there. So Miriam is Moshe's older sister. You recall Miriam was the one who, when he was placed in the water as an infant, she was watching him. She gave the advice to go find a Israelite wet nurse. She was the one who led the women in the Song of the Sea. She's one of the great women of our history. And she dies in our Parsha, chapter 20, verse 1. And the consequences of her passing are immediate. The very next verse, Velo haya mayim le'eda. There was no water for the congregation, and they gather up against Moshe and against Aaron. And Rashi tells us that the juxtaposition of these two events, it's not a coincidence. It never is. This reveals that for 40 years, this well was in the merit of Miriam. And the commentaries tell us that the nation did not accord Miriam sufficient honor and respect. She was not properly mourned. The people did not appreciate her greatness. In fact, the Midrash tells us that Moshe lamented the fact that when Miriam died, nobody came to comfort Moshe and Aaron. It was Moshe, it was Aaron's sons, and they were burying her by themselves. And they were bewailing the loss of this great woman by themselves. And they eulogized her by themselves. And they buried her by themselves. You would think, this is the greatest woman in the whole nation. You would imagine that the whole nation would gather and mourn, but they didn't. And this led to the cessation of the well. It's implied by the commentaries, some of them talk about this explicitly, that had the nation properly accorded the due respect for Miriam in her passing, the miracle of the well would have been perpetuated. But because she was not properly appreciated, it ceased. And this leads to the waters of the strife episode that condemned Moshe and Aaron to die. And again, God tells Moshe, take the staff, speak to the rock. He hits the rock. And indeed, the Almighty tells Moshe and Aaron, because you did not believe in me, you did not sanctify me, therefore you will not bring this congregation to the land that I am going to give them. And then the verse tells us that these are the waters of the strife. And this is a nice callback, Rashi tells us. When Moshe was not even born yet, in chapter 1 of Exodus, Pharaoh made a decree that all the babies, even the Egyptian babies were told, they should all be thrown to the water. Why water? And Rashi tells us because Pharaoh's stargazers and necromancers and fortune tellers and gurus, they were able to look into the stars. They were able to tell that the savior of the Jewish people, he'll suffer, he'll die as a result of water. So they came up with an ingenious idea, take all the babies, chuck them into the water, fulfill the prophecy, and solve the problem. And the verse tells us over here in chapter 20 of Numbers that these are the waters of strife that they had forecasted. They just, of course, misinterpreted it. This is now, 120 years hence. Indeed, the Savior of the Jewish people is downed, so to speak, by water, but not because he drowned in the water, but because of this event. That is the beginning of chapter 20, the death of Miriam. And then at the end of the chapter, we have the death of Aaron. They arrive at Mount Hor, and God tells Moshe and Aaron, you're going to die. Go ascend the mountain. So Aaron and Moshe and Aaron's successor and his son Elazar, they ascend the mountain. And Aaron is divested of his special garments. And Elazar, he is donned those special garments. And when they return from the mountain, it's not Aaron, Moshe, and Elazar. It's just Moshe and Elazar. And the people see what happened. They witness the death of Aaron. And they bewailed Aaron for 30 days. Kol Beis Yisrael, the entire congregation of Israel. Now, like the death of Miriam, the death of Aaron also had immediate consequences. This is chapter 21, verse 1. The verse tells us that the Canaanites, they heard, not clear what they heard, but they heard something and they attacked Israel. They attacked the nation. Rashi explains that the Canaanites were actually Amalekites, but they were masquerading as Canaanites, and they heard that Aaron died. And the reason why they thought that this was an opportune time to attack is because in the merit of Miriam, we have the well. In the merit of Aaron, we have those protective clouds of glory. For 40 years, the nation is enveloped by these magical, miraculous clouds of glory. The Anane HaKavod. And that was in the merit of Aaron. And Aaron passes. And this Kevlar, these clouds of Kevlar that have been protecting and ensconcing the nation, they're gone. And the enemies see that, and they think it's an opportunity to pounce, to attack the now vulnerable nation. And in fact, the Talmud tells us that this family, this remarkable family, the three children of Amram and Yocheved, they were the three benefactors of the nation. Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. And in their merit, there were three gifts that were bestowed upon the nation. The well of Miriam, the clouds of glory of Aaron, and the manna of Moshe. And in our Parsha, Miriam dies, and when she dies, well, her gift goes away. The well stops when Miriam dies, and that's why there's no water. But then it came back, the Talmud tells us, in the merit of Moshe and Aaron. And then Aaron died, and then the clouds of glory went away, because that was in his merit. And that's why they were attacked by the Amalekites masquerading as Canaanites. And then it came back in the merit of Moshe. And when Moshe died, the manna stopped. And the clouds of glory that were originally the merit of Aaron, but now were in the merit of Moshe, they went away. And the well that was originally in the merit of Miriam, and then restored by Moshe and Aaron, that went away as well. So I want to focus on the death and the immediate aftermath of these two benefactors of the people. In our parsha, Miriam dies, Aaron dies, and of course, as we always do on year 8 of the Parsha Podcast, we go deep and deeper to find some secrets. Miriam was one of the benefactors of the nation. In her merit, the nation had water. The well of Miriam, Be'er Miriam. It was all in her merit. For 40 years, how many times do you drink a day? How much water? 2 liters a day you're supposed to have, right? And if you're outdoors, maybe 4 liters. Lots and lots of water. You gotta stay hydrated. All that, a nation of millions of people, they're all drinking water that's coming out of a rock. Well springs of water out of a rock in the merit of Miriam. You recall that after the Exodus, chapter 16 or 17 of the book of Exodus, Moshe was told to strike the rock. He struck the rock, and it emitted water. And this well that was embedded within the rock, it was following the nation for the duration of the 40 years. It was like this mobile well that followed them in their journeys. The Mishnah tells us that this well is one of the 10 things that were created at twilight. Meaning, during the week of Genesis, we're told of all the things that were created on day 1 and day 2 and so on, day 6. There were 10 things, the Mishnah tells us, in chapter 5 of Pirkei Avos. There were 10 things that were created at twilight of Friday. So it's like halfway, it's a hybrid, halfway between the weekday and the Shabbos. It's a hybrid, it's an amalgam, it's a fusion of the mundane and the transcendental, of the weekday and the Shabbos. And this well, it's called the well of Miriam, but it's been deployed in the past. It's been deployed previously. In fact, there's many episodes of wells in the Torah. And if you look at some of the other commentators, some of the deeper sources, they trace and they link many of the episodes, in Genesis in particular, of wells to this same well. You recall Abraham's digging wells, and there's always fights over wells, and Isaac has these 3 wells, and then the Philistines, they plug up the wells, and he gives them names, and it seems like there's a lot of details about these wells. The commentators do connect those wells to this well. Perhaps you recall the episode of Abraham banishing Hagar and her son Ishmael. Ishmael is a bad influence on Isaac. He wants to kill Isaac. And Sarah tells Abraham, send him away. Abraham doesn't want to do it. God tells Abraham, listen, hearken to Sarah. And he banishes them. And he gives them some water, but that is depleted. And Ishmael's about to die. And Hagar prays for him. Ishmael prays for himself. And they're shown a well. The Midrash tells us that this well that they were shown in the desert is the same well, is an earlier iteration of the same well that's featured in our Parsha, the well of Miriam. It's been around for a very long time, since twilight of Friday of Genesis, and there are more stops and junctures in its journey. It makes other appearances, but now it's here in the merit of Miriam. It's been a fixture of the nation's life for 40 years, and then Miriam dies, and it disappears. And it comes back thanks to Moshe and Aaron, but when Moshe dies, it goes away. And we're told, Rashi brings it down, that it did not cease. It went to the Sea of the Galilee, to the Kinneret. And it embedded itself there, and that's where it's hanging out. It's still around today. You could travel to Israel, and you could go to the Kinneret, to the Sea of Galilee. And in there, somewhere in there, is the same well, the well of Miriam, this well that was created at twilight of Genesis, of the week of Genesis, between Friday and Shabbos. Now, the significance of this well is quite vast. The Midrash calculates for us that the Hebrew word for well is be'er. It means a well, be'er. And this word appears 48 times in the Torah. And that's not a coincidence, says the Midrash, because there are 48 different pathways to Torah. There are 48 ways to wisdom. This is the Parsha Podcast, as you know. But you are familiar with the fact that I am also the fortunate host of an ethics podcast that goes through the book, The Ethics of Our Fathers, Pirkei Avos. And right now we're wrapping up the section of the book that's the 48 ways to wisdom. There's 48 portals to Torah. There's 48 well springs in which a person can absorb some of the waters of Torah. And that's what the word be'er appears 48 times in the Torah. Now this word be'er, it has another meaning. The word be'er also means to explain and to clarify. At the beginning of Devarim, the verse tells us, I think it's Devarim chapter 1 verses, I think it's either 5 or 6. I probably should have done my research before I got to record here. I think it's 1:5 or 1:6. It says that Moshe began to clarify the Torah. Be'eres HaTorah azos. The same word for a well. It's the word for clarity, to clarify. And Rashi there tells us that Moshe conveyed the Torah in 70 languages. All the languages, in every possible way of communicating, Moshe conveyed the Torah to us in Devarim. So this idea of a well, it's the same word as the word that means clarity and complete clarity, scintillating clarity, clarifying the Torah from every perspective, in every dimension, in every angle, in all the possible ways that it can be clarified. Now we're told further, the well, it's not just a convenient source of H2O. We're told that this well, this special well, the well of Miriam, this special well bestowed upon anyone who drank from it unprecedented clarity. And there's a story, I've told this in the past, many years ago, when the Arizal arrived to Tzfat in the 1570s. He came there with an objective to teach the Kabbalistic Torah to his student, Rabbi Chaim Vital. And they were together for only 2 years. And he was teaching and teaching and teaching him, and his student was not absorbing it. And what happened was, this is a story that's recounted by the student, Baruch Chaim Vital. The Arizal, he took him to the Sea of the Galilee. And they got into a boat. And they went to a certain part of the sea. And he took a cup. And he says, right over here, right where we are. This is where the wellspring of Miriam is currently situated. And he took a little cup and gave him to drink. And once he drank from that, the well springs opened. The clarity, the Be'eres HaTorah, the 70 dimensions, all that was open before him, and was able to convey to him in a very quick fashion all of the infinite secrets of the Kabbalistic Torah. And my father told me that when he was a kid, he went with his father on vacation to the northern part of Israel. And he remembers his father going to the city of Tiberias and inquiring and asking, where do we find, does anyone know where exactly in this sea that water spot is? Because I really, really want to drink from that wellspring. But isn't it interesting? The word be'er, which means a well, it's the same word as clarity and clarification and scintillating clarity in all languages in every possible dimension. And this is part of our Parsha, the story of our Parsha. And we have a description. It's the well of Miriam. It was in a rock. It was lost when she died, and it was restored in our Parsha. And I'm thinking perhaps there's some lesson for us in our pursuit of clarity, of insight, of wisdom, of greatness. Maybe there's a lesson for us. And what got me thinking is that I remember a different episode in the Torah with a rock and water. We're in the book of Numbers. But you recall perhaps way back in Genesis, Jacob and his twin brother Esav, you remember this. And Esav, he was the firstborn, and Jacob did the whole usurpation of the blessings. He impersonated him. You remember that story, right? And then when Esav finds out, he's hopping mad. And he plans to kill Jacob. And Jacob is fleeing, and he makes a pit stop on Temple Mount, and he has a dream with the ladders to heaven, ascending and descending angels. And then he arrives in Haran, and he's there to meet one of the daughters of Laban, and he's going to marry her and settle down there and wait for his brother's wrath to subside. And he goes to the well. And he sees a well, and there's a large boulder, a stone, a rock, atop the well. And he sees some loafing shepherds there, and he talks to them, and he gives them some rebuke. You're hired hands. Why are you loafing around midday? You should be working. And then Rachel, the daughter of Laban, arrives, and he sees her, and he gets up, and he single-handedly dislodges the stone and gives water to Laban's sheep. So I have another story here. There's water, and it's in a well, and it's covered by a rock. And I have this interesting observation. A Parsha Podcast special. We have 2 episodes of a rock and water, and I see 2 very different ways to extract the water. In our Parsha, you read it very carefully. Hashem tells Moshe, there's water in the rock. Get the rock to emit its water. I think of it like shale rock. There's oil, precious, black gold, trapped in tiny, tiny fissures in the rock. And you have to do some horizontal drilling. And you gotta shatter the rock by fracking it. And that's how you extract the liquid. That's how I imagine this. There's water in the rock. We gotta get it out. Okay, so he'll speak it. Moshe doesn't speak it. He strikes it. But regardless, the water comes out of the rock. That's what happens in our Parsha. In Jacob's story, something else happened. He also wanted water, and he had to do something to the rock. But unlike in our Parsha, where the water came forth from the rock, Jacob, he had to bypass the rock and discover the water that was gathered beyond the rock. Now, ordinarily, this would be something that we can perhaps overlook. But of course, it's the area of the Parsha Podcast. we got to go a bit deeper. And especially if we're being told that the water is symbolic of Torah, the well is symbolic of Torah, and there's 48 instances in the Torah where the word be'er, meaning well, appears, because there are 48 different pathways to Torah. And this is the same word for clarification, for complete, utter clarity of Torah. I think it's interesting. In one instance, we have the word be'er, a well, and the water is inside the rock. And then we have a second instance where the rock is completely bereft of water. But you still have to navigate the rock in order to get the water. So is this an interesting observation? I would propose that it is. But what to do with this observation? So I want to suggest an idea. You may claim and say, Rabbi Wolbe, it's a bit of a half-baked idea. There's still some work to do to develop it. And I will say to you, you are correct. It's a bit half-baked. It could maybe use some further development. But I think it's certainly something to chew over and to ponder and to cogitate upon and to ruminate upon and perhaps to consider. And if you have anything else you want to add to this, I'm open to suggestions. RabbiWolbe@gmail.com. So here's the idea. We're told that the water, well, that's symbolic of wisdom, of Torah. There's 48 times where this word, the well, appears in the Torah because there's 48 pathways to Torah, and we're told, Ein mayim elo Torah. The Torah is many places compared to water. Water collects at the bottom, we're told in the Talmud. Water always travels down. And that's like Torah. Torah only gathers within someone who is low, who is humble. So water is symbolic of Torah. But what is the symbolism of a stone? And it's a bit confusing because I saw a midrash. And the midrash says, and I'll read it to you so you know I'm not misquoting it. Torah kruya even. Torah is called a stone. V'yetzer hara, and the evil inclination, our nemesis, our foe, our antagonist. It's also called even. It's also called a stone. And it provides citations. The luchos, the tablets, were made of stone. The tablets are the encapsulation of the Torah. It's made of stone. Oh, and then in the book of Ezekiel, it describes the Yetzer Hara as a stone heart. So stone, even, is being used to portray, to symbolize both the Torah and the Yetzer Hara. And I cannot think of anything more incompatible, more opposed to each other as Torah and the Yetzer Hara. But this is what the Midrash says. Sometimes the stone is Torah. Sometimes the even, the stone, is Torah. It looks like a stone, but that is misleading. It actually is Torah. You have to break it open. You got to find a way to extract from that stone, from that rock, the Torah that is embedded within it. But sometimes the stone is the Yetzer Hara. It's not Torah. And you need to bypass it. You need to overcome it in some way, in some fashion, in order to get the Torah, which may lie beyond the stone. Rocks are not monolithic. Okay, let me say that again. I'm very proud of it. Rocks are not monolithic. Sometimes the rocks are Torah, because it contains Torah within it. And sometimes it's the Yetzer Hara. So maybe in our Parsha, we have a stone, and Hashem tells Moshe, the Imai tells Moshe, go speak to it, go strike it. In it is water. That's the type of stone that has Torah within it, that has that clarity within it, that has that wellspring within it. In the episode of Jacob, perhaps, the stone is symbolic of the other way that stone can manifest itself. It is the Yetzer Hara, and you need to overcome it to get to the water. Again, it's somewhat confusing Because in some citations we're told that the stone is symbolic of Torah. In others we're told that it's emblematic of the evil inclination, the great foe that we need to overcome and defeat. So maybe the idea is like this. Stone, it never looks like water. It always seems to be an obstacle. But in our Parsha, we discover that some obstacles are actually well springs masquerading as flinty stones. And when we encounter a stone, when we meet an obstacle, we have to be very careful. We have to scrutinize it very carefully to determine what sort of stone is this. The Midrash tells us that stone could be, the Eitzah could be Torah. There are two types of stones because there are two types of obstacles. Sometimes it's just the Eitzah, you have to bypass it. You gotta roll aside the boulder, you have to dislodge the stone because the only way to get to the be'er, to the clarity, to the Torah, to the water, it's only if you move the stone aside. But sometimes, within the obstacle itself, within the stone itself is embedded that greatness, that clarity that we all want. And you have to find some way to extract from the obstacle itself the well springs of greatness that are embedded within it. This is an idea that we see a lot. Sometimes, within the struggle, within the challenge, within the conflict, precisely there, that's where all the greatness is hiding. That rock, that stone, that's so menacing and fearsome and distracting and problematic. It's just a facade. It's a facade that's covering up what actually is a great opportunity. The Talmud tells us whoever is greater than his friend has a greater Yetzirah. The larger the stone, the more fearsome the stone, that is directly proportional to how wonderful, how delightful, how delicious, how empowering, how scintillatingly clear the waters embedded within it are. Often, from our challenges, stem our opportunities. From our difficulties emerge our greatness. But it's not always the case. Because sometimes the stone, as in the case of Jacob, it needs to be bypassed. It needs to be sidestepped. And the real $1,000,000 question is, how do you tell the difference? I mean, Midrash tells us that the stones, Yetzirah is called a stone, a Torah is called a stone. Well, how do I tell the difference? How can we tell if the stone needs to be spoken to, needs to be struck, or needs to be dislodged? That's the tricky question. And that's why I'm telling you it's deep and deeper, but not necessarily fully baked. We still need to mull this over, but thus concludes segment number 1, what we can learn perhaps from the aftermath of the death of Miriam. What about the aftermath of the death of Aaron? The final verse in chapter 20 of Numbers, verse 29. The nation sees that Aaron dies, and they bewail him for 30 days. Kol Beis Yisrael, all of the house of Israel. Now Rashi, as he always does, he notices something very subtle. In the final chapter of the Torah, in chapter 34 of Devarim, Moshe dies. Spoiler alert. And Moshe was also mourned. This is 34:8. And the verse says, Vayivku b'nei Yisrael es Moshe, ba'arvos Moav shloshim yom. And the sons of Israel, the Israelites, they cried over Moshe for 30 days in the plains of Moab. Rashi notices a very subtle difference between the mourning of Moshe and the mourning of Aaron. Whereas by Aaron it says that they mourned him for 30 days, Kol Beis Yisrael, the entirety, the whole family of Israel. By Moshe doesn't say that. It doesn't say the whole family of Israel. It says the family of Israel. Vayivku b'nei Yisrael. And in both instances, Rashi makes the same observation, the same comment. When Aaron died, everyone cried, the man and the woman, because Aaron, he was a peacemaker. He pursued peace, and he would ensure that there was a restoration of love and harmony between husband and wife and between litigants and people who were at odds with each other. But Moshe, that wasn't his job. He wasn't a peacemaker. And therefore, the children of Israel, the males, but not the females. There wasn't that same universal mourning of Moshe as there was of Aaron. That's the comment that Rashi makes, both in our Parsha, 20:29 of Numbers, and in 34:8 of Devarim. Now, there's a fascinating comment in the Maharal here, in his super commentary on Rashi. And he says, wait, did the women really not mourn Moshe? This makes it seem like Moshe, he wasn't so popular. This is election season, right? In America, we have elections. And what do? Everyone wants to do what you can to get elected. But of course, to govern, that's a different story. That's, of course, the tyranny of democracies, that even though democracy is better than most other systems, of course, I don't want to get canceled here. But the problem with democracy is that everyone gets to vote. And, well, if you're popular, then you'll get more votes because you're more popular. And sometimes you need to have an unpopular leader to make the right decisions, to govern well. So in a popularity contest, the most competent, the most able, the most capable will not necessarily win. So some may interpret this comment in Rashi as that Moshe, well, he wasn't popular. He wasn't giving a lot of handouts. He wasn't doing all sorts of programs to make people happy. He wasn't so popular. So maybe the men cried, but not the women. That's what it seems like in Rashi. But come on. Is it really possible to say that these people who witnessed Moshe, leader of Jewish people, gave us the Torah, all these miracles, they did not appreciate him? They did not mourn him? Isn't Moshe one of the benefactors who brought us so much good? He brought us the manna, as we learned earlier. He restored the well of Miriam after it ceased. He brought back the clouds of glory after Aaron died. So Moshe is a benefactor of the whole nation. Is it possible to say that only some segments mourned him? That's the question that he asks. And he gives a very deep and powerful and delightful answer. He says, certainly, Moshe was mourned by all, by men, by women, not a question. But Moshe benefited the people, and Aaron benefited the people. And the mourning of Moshe and Aaron reflected the relationship and the connection that people had with Moshe and Aaron, respectively. What did Moshe do? He gave us the Torah. He gave us the manna, all the miracles. He benefited everyone. But what was the type of the benefit that Moshe bestowed upon the people? Moshe's benefit, says the Maharal, it was unitary. It was singular. Everyone got manna from the Almighty, but in the merit of Moshe. Everyone got the Torah from the Almighty in the merit of Moshe. Moshe provided the same thing for everyone. Everyone got manna in his merit, Torah in his merit. And therefore, the type of mourning that they did, it was across the board the same kind of thing. Because everyone had a very similar relationship with Moshe as their peers had. But Aaron, he was a peacemaker. He was the consummate peacemaker. What does a peacemaker do? He does not relate to everyone in the same way. In fact, that's exactly what he does not do. The role of a peacemaker is to understand the two incompatible sides, the two warring sides, and to understand them on their own level. They're at odds. They're not getting along. They're fighting. Husband, wife, even two people, two friends that had something that came up. And they have different perspectives, and their perspectives are mutually exclusive. It's contradictory. We were told, men are from Mars and women are from Venus. So of course they're going to get into fights. That's what the gurus tell us. Aaron spoke like a Martian to the man. He understood him and his perspective. And then he would speak to the women like a Venetian. Is that how you say it? That's someone from Venice, like a Venusian. I don't know what the right word is. He understood her and her perspective on her level. And their relationship was different. And each one, in a completely different way, was addressed by Aaron, and he was able to bridge those gaps. And he's pulling the husband from one side, the woman from the other side, and restoring unity, restoring peace, resuming peace amongst them. And husband and wife, but even any two people. That's what Aaron did. That's what a peacemaker does. And thus he benefited the men and the women in different ways. And thus when they mourned for him, of course they mourned for Moshe as well, but everyone mourned in the same fashion because everyone had the same relationship with him. But the men mourned for Aaron in one way, based upon what he did for them, and the women mourned for Aaron in a different way. This is what the Maharal says. And I think it's a fascinating idea. It's a masterclass for how to make peace. You have to really understand the perspective of the two people who are incompatible. That's what Aaron did. He teaches us how to make peace. You have to understand each opposing perspective, and not only that, to really inhabit their world, to really get them in a way that each person's relationship with you is completely unique. That was Aaron's role, and thus the sort of mourning that happened for Aaron in mirror the relationship that he had with men and women respectively. And you can imagine that this would be even more granular. Aaron, the peacemaker, he benefited every individual in an individual way, and that's why everyone had an individual relationship with him. And each individual mourned and wept for Aaron in a unique manner. I think there's maybe another insight that we can take from this idea. Again, something deep and deeper to ponder further. We're told in many sources that Moshe and Aaron, they were a team. In one instance, Rashi tells us, sometimes it says Moshe's name before Aaron, sometimes Aaron's name before Moshe, because they were equal. They're like co-heads of the nation, but they work together. They work wonderfully together. Maybe this idea in the Maharal is really the essence of the different roles that Moshe and Aaron played. We've mentioned this numerous times, that the Torah, of course, it's universal. Every Jew has to do all 613 mitzvahs to the best of their abilities. And my mitzvah and my neighbor's mitzvah are the same, right? We have to wear the same tefillin, gotta follow the same rules, same tzitzis, same laws of Shabbos. It's all the same. But there's also the individual responsibility. Everyone has unique mitzvos and unique characteristics and unique challenges that are part of their individual Torah, so to speak. Just like, the tzitzis, right? The tzitzis is symbolic of all of Torah. We had tzitzis a few weeks ago, Parshas Shlach. And tzitzis is symbolic of all of Torah. It has the knots. It has the part of it that are bound, that are rigid. And then you have the free-floating streams that are more flexible. There's parts of Torah that are universal. And the laws are very clear and cemented in stone and universal across the board. Everyone's got to do the same thing. But everyone else has to find their own calling and their own part of Torah that they really connect with, and their own midos, their own characteristics, their own character traits that they're really supposed to exemplify. Moshe and Aaron are we can perhaps extend the Maharal's idea, Moshe and Aaron are symbolic of these two Torahs. Moshe is giving us this kind of this unitary Torah, this fixed Torah, so to speak. And Aaron, his responsibility or his quality on some level is to reach out to every individual and try to show the individual what is your unique calling, what is your unique soul, the unique mission that you have, the thing that you to the exclusion of anyone else, you need to contribute in the Almighty's world. And this is an idea that we spoke about in the past as well. There are two vessels in the tabernacle that are symbolic of Torah. The ark, it's got the crown around it. That's the crown of Torah. The menorah, we're told, that is the light of Torah. I always ask my friends, like, oh, why do we need two vessels that are both symbolic of Torah? If you want to become wise, the Talmud tells us, you got to veer southward. Why? Because the menorah was on the southern part of the tabernacle. Oh, and if you want to become rich, you got to go north. Because the shulchan, the table, that was on the northern part of the tabernacle. So the menorah was symbolic of Torah, but so is the ark. Maybe the ark, well, that's almost like Moshe's Torah. Very fixed, very rigid. The menorah, perhaps we can speculate, it has one base, but then it branches out to the right and to the left. There's multiple branches. And that's symbolic of every individual's, so to speak, light of Torah that they must develop and promulgate forth. And we're told that Moshe, he was not able to understand the menorah. He had to see it projected upon the mountain. And he tried to understand. He couldn't do it. Why did Moshe struggle so much with the menorah? Because maybe this is really the domain of Aaron. I was thinking, Moshe gave us the manna. What did the manna taste like? Manna tastes like whatever you want it to taste like. You want shawarma? You want a Mediterranean food? You want a superfood like avocados, blueberries, ice cream, or pickles? Whatever you want, or almost whatever you want, the manna could become any flavor. But that was not what Moshe did. He gave you the manna, you figure out, so to speak, on your own what you want it to taste like. So maybe this is just, again, a larger idea that Moshe has this unitary, this across the board relationship with the nation. And thus they all mourned him, but everyone mourned him the same way, whereas Aaron, everyone mourned them in an individualistic way. Maybe there's a lesson for us about what really the two elements of the Torah that we must understand and work upon, the universal and the individualistic and personal. Some ideas to chew upon. Maybe you could argue that this is also half-baked, but isn't that what we do? Half-baked ideas. I think this one is maybe 3/4 or 9/10 baked. I think it's good enough. I think it qualifies, and I appreciate your time and your listenership. Right now it's already past 12:30 Eastern time. It's early Thursday morning. I'm going to stop recording, begin editing, and hopefully release it very soon. But I appreciate your time and your listenership. I hope you enjoy this. I want to thank the Almighty. I'm telling you, I say this a lot, but it's really true. This is all a gift from the Almighty, because this came out of nothing. And I really had very, very, very little time this week to prepare, to really do any work at all. I apologize for all of y'all that are waiting for my emails and responses. I'll get to everyone, please God, eventually. I apologize for that. Forgive me. I'm working really hard. Thank you, Almighty God, for giving us this wonderful Torah and this wonderful podcast, which I enjoyed. Maybe you didn't enjoy it. That's okay. Send me an email, rabbi@wobajima.com. Have a wonderful, splendid day and rest of your week, and sensational, exhilarating, peaceful, safe, invigorating Shabbos. And please God, with the unending help of the Almighty, we'll talk again next week. The email address is rabbi@gmail.com.